My daughter-in-law reached across the birthday table, picked up my son's phone right out of his hand, and started reading his private messages out loud to the restaurant. Not all of them, just the ones from me. She read 3 of them in a voice doing something very particular, loud enough to perform for her mother, low enough to look like she was just having a conversation. The last one was a message I'd sent that morning. "Happy birthday, son. Supper's on me tonight, I love you." She set the phone face down on the tablecloth, looked at Heather Brandt across from her and said, "See, this is what I deal with." And Heather Brandt, Sasha's mother, 63 years old, licensed operator of a home childcare center in Ancaster, leaned back in her chair and smiled the way someone smiles when they've been waiting for the rest of the table to catch up with them. She said, "He's always been like that, hasn't he? Too attached." The restaurant was a place on King William Street, the kind of room with exposed brick and good risotto and enough ambient noise that you could have a private conversation if you wanted one. We didn't want one. There were 8 tables occupied. A couple in their 40s near the window. A group of women celebrating something, 4 of them, one wearing a sash. The server, I read his name tag when I paid the bill later, Adam, had stopped pretending to polish the glass he was holding. He was standing at the bar 12 feet behind Sasha's left shoulder, and he was very still. I had been watching my son's face for the 30 seconds between when Sasha picked up that phone and when Heather said what she said. I know what Corbin's face does when he's bracing. I have known that face since he was 4 years old. Both shoulders come in, the way they did the first time he stepped onto the ice at the arena in Dundas and realized the other kids had been skating since they could walk. Chin drops maybe 10 degrees. Something behind the eyes goes very still and very deep, like he's taking everything that's happening and putting it somewhere no one can reach. I've watched my son do that since he was a child, and I have hated every second of it because it means something has already hurt him. And the hurting has been going on long enough that he's learned not to show it. I was 63 years old sitting at that table, and I wanted to do something I haven't done since I was probably 35. I didn't. I've spent 27 years as a forensic accountant with the Canada Revenue Agency. My entire career was built on one principle I want you to keep in your pocket, because it explains everything that comes after this. You do not react to the irregularity. You document it, you trace it, you build the complete picture. Then you let the process do what the process is designed to do. I have sat across from people who lied to the government for decades, who built entire second lives on paper they were certain no one would ever read, and I have never once let my face tell them what I was thinking. That is not a skill you are born with. It is something you do 10,000 times until it becomes the only option. I want to be honest with you the way I'd want you to be honest with me. I was not calm. My hands were flat on the tablecloth and they were entirely still, and that stillness was the hardest thing I had done in a very long time. But here is what 27 years teaches you about people who are doing something wrong in front of witnesses. They don't check the room. People who are certain they're in the right never check the room. So I picked up my phone, opened the camera, set it against my water glass angled toward the 2 of them, let it run. My name is Harold Ainsworth. Everyone's called me Hal since about 1979, which gives you a rough idea. I'm 63 years old and I live in the house my wife and I bought in Hamilton in 1991, about 6 minutes from Gage Park, in the kind of neighborhood where people still wave at you when you take the recycling out. I retired from the CRA 2 years ago after 27 years that would put you to sleep if I described them in detail. The short version, I followed money. I found where it went when it wasn't supposed to go there. I wrote reports that other people acted on. It was not glamorous, and I was good at it. My wife was Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She died 4 years ago in November, a heart attack at home on a Saturday morning, and it was fast, and there was nothing anyone could have done, and I have made my peace with about 2/3 of that sentence. I still have her reading glasses in the kitchen drawer. I'm not explaining that. It's just a fact. My son is Corbin. He's 32, a civil engineer downtown, works for a firm that does infrastructure projects for the city. He has his mother's patience and my stubbornness, which has generally served him well and occasionally has not. He got married 3 years ago at a venue out on the Niagara Escarpment, one of those places where the whole ceremony is outdoors and you pray it doesn't rain, and it doesn't rain. I gave the toast. I said I was grateful to be gaining a daughter, and I meant it when I said it. That is something I have had to make a particular peace with. Sasha is 30. She does social media consulting, runs her own client list, works from home. She has a very firm sense of how things should be, and she lets you know it quickly, which I initially mistook for confidence. First time I met her, I thought, this one knows exactly what she wants. I kept the second half of that thought to myself. I have since re-examined that habit. Heather Brandt is Sasha's mother, 63, out of Ancaster. She runs a licensed home daycare, 8 children, operating under the Child Care and Early Years Act, licensed by the Ontario Ministry of Education and Care. She has run it for 16 years. She is the kind of woman who speaks in a tone that has already decided the discussion is over, and she wears that tone like a coat she hasn't taken off since 1995. She has had one hand inside that marriage since the first month of it. Now the dinner. King William Street, a Thursday in March, Corbin's 32nd birthday. He'd made the reservation himself, which was not something Sasha usually allowed. I noted that without remarking on it. I arrived first and sat for a few minutes watching the room settle. Old habit. The kind you don't turn off. 4 of us, me, Corbin, Sasha, and Heather. I had known when I invited Corbin that Sasha would bring her mother. She always does. I want to be precise about the first 45 minutes because the contrast matters. It was fine. Good risotto, reasonable wine, neutral conversation. Corbin talked about a project on the link. Heather talked about a licensing renewal she described as unnecessarily complicated. I said almost nothing, which is what I do when I'm watching a room. Then Corbin's phone lit up beside his plate. He glanced at it, turned it face down, normal enough. Sasha watched him do it. I know what I was seeing because I have interviewed people for 27 years. And the tell is never the large gesture. The tell is always in the small one. She watched him turn the phone over and she said nothing and she picked up her wine and she waited, the way someone waits who has already written the next few lines of the conversation and is simply letting the other person reach them. 20 seconds later she reached across and picked it up. I want to slow down here. Not because I enjoy it, because the next 4 minutes are the entire story and the source of everything that followed. She didn't ask, she just took it, unlocked it, which means she knew his passcode, or he'd given it to her, or something else I wasn't ready to think about yet, and she started scrolling. Corbin said quietly, "Sasha." She said, "I'm just looking." He said, "Can you put it down, please?" She read the first message out loud, one of mine from 2 weeks earlier about coming by for dinner on the weekend. Her voice had a particular quality to it, not loud, not hostile, something more practiced than either. The quality of a person who has established what is normal and is now very calmly demonstrating it. She read 2 more, then the birthday message. Then she set the phone face down and said, "What I told you," she said. And Heather Brandt leaned back and smiled and said, "What I told you," she said. My son picked up his fork. He moved the food around his plate once. He set the fork back down, both shoulders in, chin dropped, eyes gone somewhere very deep and very far away. I have watched my son do that since he was 4 years old. My hand moved toward my phone, not toward Sasha, toward the camera. 38 seconds. Sasha's voice clear in the second half. Heather's face in frame the entire time, arms folded, expression that I am telling you was approval. The light in that restaurant was warm and adequate, and every bit of it was clean. I set the phone back on the table the way you set a pen down after signing the last line of a report. Then I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate. Said, "I'll get the check." Sasha said, "We haven't had dessert." I said, "I'll get the check." I paid for all 4 of us, including the birthday dessert none of us were having. I stood up and looked at my son and said, "Get your coat, Corbin." He looked at Sasha, then at Heather, then at me. Something in my face, I wasn't managing it by then, made him stand up. Sasha started to say something and I turned and looked at her. The face I used across a table from a man who had been writing off a ski chalet he'd sold 2 years before the claim period. Level, entirely finished. I said, "Enjoy your evening." I walked my son out of that restaurant. We sat in my truck on King William for a while. I watched the clock on the dash. 11 minutes. He didn't say anything for the first 4. Then he said, "Dad, I don't want you to do anything." I said, "I've already done something." He said, "What?" I said, "I recorded it." Long pause. "Dad." I said, "Corbin, has this happened before?" He looked out at the street. Thursday night, people walking, a group coming out of the bar across the road. He said, "Not like that. Not exactly like that." I have conducted interviews for 27 years. That is the answer of someone who has been sorting things into acceptable and unacceptable for a very long time. And the categories have moved so many times they've stopped feeling like categories. I said, "How long?" Nothing. I said, "Corbin, how long?" He said, "To the window, pretty much from the start." He told me then, not all at once. In pieces the way a person tells you a thing they've been carrying when they've finally decided they're allowed to set it down. She managed the money. Both salaries went into an account she controlled. He had what she called a spending account. He used the phrase with no particular inflection, which told me it was her phrase, absorbed so many times it had become neutral. The account had a limit. When he went over it, they had a conversation she initiated, and he did not enjoy. His phone had a family sharing setting she'd installed. She reviewed it weekly. He stopped, looked at his hands. He said, "The phone thing started about 2 months ago, after I had lunch with Pete from work a few times." He said it the way someone says a thing that sounds small and is not. She said Pete was a bad influence, that he was encouraging me to be less. He stopped. She just didn't like it. I want to tell you what I felt sitting in that truck, because the version of this story where I was composed the whole time is a lie, and lies don't help anybody. I felt something break open in my chest that I do not have a proper word for. Not quite anger, though there was more than enough of that too. Something older. The feeling of a man who spent 27 years tracing financial control through shell companies and false records and then came home and missed the same pattern inside his own family. Account access removed, replaced with an allowance, communication monitored, isolation from outside relationships. I have documented that pattern in corporations. I have written reports about it. I had never once expected to be writing a report about it in connection with my son's apartment on Cannon Street. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I knew what you'd do." I want you to sit with that for a moment, with me. I spent 32 years being the father who handles things, the one you call, the one who fixes it, and my son heard that as, don't bring him anything he can't handle without it becoming a situation he can't walk back from. So he carried it alone, 2.5 years of it, alone. That is the thing in this whole story I would take back if I could take one thing back. Whatever else I got right, I got that wrong for a long time. I didn't say any of it in the truck. I put my hand over his and I said, "All right, here's what happens now. You're staying at the house tonight. Tomorrow morning I make some calls. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Just let me work." He said, "Dad, I don't want this to become a whole..." I said, "She read your private messages out loud in a restaurant on your birthday, and her mother told her well done. It already is as a whole something." He gave me one small nod. The nod of a man who has been very tired for about 2.5 years and had not been allowed to notice. He fell asleep in the spare room under Maggie's old quilt. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the video 3 times to confirm I had what I thought I had. I had it. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Bev Cotter. Bev was my partner for 11 of my 27 years at CRA, and she is the most methodical person I have ever worked alongside, and she now does forensic accounting work for a family law firm in Burlington. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I have video of Sasha reading Corbin's private messages out loud at a restaurant tonight. Her mother was present and endorsing it clearly." Long pause. She said, "Is there a financial component?" I said, "She controls all the household accounts. He has a spending allowance with a limit and she monitors his phone." Longer pause. She said, "Hal, that's coercive control. That's a pattern, not an incident." Then her voice shifted, the same shift I have in my own, from person to professional, and she said, "Call a family lawyer before 9 a.m. Before she gets legal advice first. I'll send you a name." She sent me Annette Chow, Family Law, Hamilton. The second call was to Annette Chow's after-hours line. She called me back at 11:30. I gave her the short version. She asked specific, rapid questions. Length of marriage, shared assets, children, whose name was on property title, whether there were joint accounts still in both names. Then she asked what Sasha did for work and whether she was incorporated. Then she asked about Heather. I told her about the child care license. Annette was quiet for a moment. She said, "She is a licensed child care operator responsible for the daily care of young children, and she is on video smiling and endorsing what is, on its face, coercive and controlling behavior, in a public restaurant, at conversational volume." I said yes. She said, "That is relevant to a fitness review under the Child Care and Early Years Act. That is a ministry matter." I sat at my kitchen table and thought about Heather Brandt, leaning back in that chair with her arms folded and that expression on her face. 16 years in that business, 8 families trusting her with their children on any given day, some of them very young. And she had sat in a restaurant and told her daughter that reading a grown man's private messages out loud in front of his father was fine, was appropriate, was something that deserved a nod and a smile. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think the cleaned-up version of this story is less true, and therefore less useful. I did not feel bad. I have thought about it since. I still don't. She said what she said in a room where she could be heard. I documented the scene. Then I handed the documentation to the people whose professional responsibility it is to evaluate those scenes. That is not revenge. That is precisely the distinction I spent 27 years learning to maintain. The next morning, Corbin and I sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. I made eggs. He drank his coffee the same way he has since he was 20. 2 sugars, no milk, which Maggie always said was not coffee but hot sugar water, and which I have never had the heart to change. He talked. I listened. I did not push him once. He showed me the banking app on his phone. $642 in the spending account. The household accounts were in Sasha's name, with him listed as a secondary holder, with transfer restrictions she had apparently changed at some point without telling him. He had noticed and said nothing. He had screenshots of her messages about the account going back 18 months. Instructions about what he was and wasn't authorized to purchase. Follow-up messages when he'd gone over the limit. The tone of those messages was calm, specific, certain. The tone of someone who has decided this is normal and has no reason to moderate herself. I photographed every screen. He had also on his own screenshotted 3 messages where she had told him not to visit me without letting her know in advance. He'd kept them in a folder. He said, "I don't know why I kept them. I just thought." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Forensic accountants keep records. It is a professional habit that turns out to apply to a great deal more than tax files. That afternoon I was in Annette Chow's office on King Street East. She watched the video twice. The second time she paused it on Heather's face and looked at me across the desk. She said, "Combined with the financial documentation, this constitutes a coercive control pattern. Ontario courts treat this seriously and the law has evolved considerably on this." She laid out the process. An emergency motion to freeze the joint accounts at their current state during proceedings. The separation agreement served through his lawyer. A referral to the ministry regarding Heather Brandt's license. The financial evidence. The account structure, the spending limit records, the monitoring messages, would be central to the asset division. She said the property, whose name is on title. I said hers. He contributed 40% of the down payment in cash. She wrote for a moment. He can document that contribution? I said he has the bank transfer records, so do I. I helped him with it. She put the pen down. She said, "You know what I find useful about forensic accountants?" I said, "Probably several things." She almost smiled. She said, "You keep everything." I said, "It's a professional hazard." The referral to the Ministry of Education and Care regarding Heather Brandt's childcare license went in that week. Submitted as a matter of professional obligation once the pattern was fully documented. The ministry does not move slowly when the question involves a licensed operator caring for young children. Investigators visited the Ancaster property within 2 weeks. They reviewed the video. They interviewed Heather. They contacted the restaurant and confirmed that staff had witnessed the incident. They reviewed her compliance history. 23 days after Corbin's birthday dinner, letters went to the families of all 8 children in Heather's care, informing them that the facility was under an active compliance review, and that they had a right to request detailed information. 6 of the 8 families removed their children within 2 weeks. I found out because one of the parents, a woman about Corbin's age whose daughter had been in Heather's care for 3 years, mentioned it in a Hamilton neighborhood Facebook group. The post got around. In a city this size, things always get around eventually. Heather called Sasha 11 times in that stretch. Corbin was logging all calls on Annette's advice. The financial proceedings moved on their own timeline. Annette's motion to freeze the accounts was granted by the Ontario court within days. Corbin's down payment contribution was documented cleanly and completely. His bank transfer record, the original purchase agreement, my own statement as witness to the transaction. Every number in the right place. Forensic accountants keep records. That is what we do. Sasha's lawyer came in hard at first. Then Annette sent the full package, the video. 18 months of account control messages, the phone monitoring documentation, the spending limit records, the down payment evidence. Corbin's written statement, which he drafted himself over 2 evenings at my kitchen table, which cost him something real, and which he did anyway. Her lawyer went quiet. I know that silence. I have heard it in rooms where the other side's expert has read your report and realized the numbers do not go where they need them to go. It is the sound of a strategy being thrown out. The separation agreement settled in 11 days, uncontested. Corbin's down payment contribution was recognized in full. His share of the assets was calculated from the date of marriage properly. Permanent separation order filed. No contest, no hearing. Annette called me the morning the agreement was filed. She said, "It's done, Hal." I was in my kitchen. Snow coming down outside. The wet March kind that doesn't stick but comes down anyway. The old house saws was making the particular sound it makes when the temperature drops and the walls adjust. She said, "You built a very solid foundation under that case." I said, "I just documented the scene, the process did the rest." 3 weeks after the settlement, Corbin came by on a Sunday. He brought groceries. Everything for Maggie's chicken soup, the one she made every March because March in Hamilton demands it, she always said. He had written the recipe down from memory on a piece of paper he pulled out of his coat pocket. He hung his coat on the hook by the door, the same hook where he'd hung his school bag every day from age 6 to 17. He looked at it for a second and said, "Same hook." I said, "Same hook." We made the soup badly. Neither of us has Maggie's hand with seasoning, and we both know it, and neither of us mentioned it. And we ate it at the kitchen table and talked about the Link project, about whether the Leafs had any real hope this season, which we agreed they probably didn't. At some point, he looked across the table at me and said, "Dad, in the truck that night, you could have said something to her right there." I said, "I could have." He said, "Why didn't you?" I said, "Because if I had, it becomes a story about me. Father causes a scene at his son's birthday dinner, and then she's the composed one and you're the man with the unstable father, and you go home with her that night and everything I did just made your life harder." I said, "I didn't stay calm, Corbin. I want to be clear about that. I stayed useful. Those are two different things. And the difference is the only reason you're sitting in my kitchen." He looked at me for a while. Then he said, "The CRA thing." I said, "The CRA thing. So here is what I took from all of it, not the part people expect. Everyone says the lesson is to stay calm. That is not the lesson. You cannot reason an angry person into being cool, and I was not cool in that truck on King William. I was about as far from cool as I've been since Maggie died. The real lesson is this. Anger is information. It tells you something is wrong. But information is not a plan, and a plan is not a reaction. The question is never whether you're angry. The question is whether what you're about to do makes the person you love safer in 6 weeks or just makes you feel better in 6 seconds. 6 seconds versus 6 weeks. I ran that calculation in the time it took Sasha to set Corbin's phone face down on the tablecloth. That calculation is available to anyone, and it costs nothing, and I have never once regretted running it. And then there is the other one. The one I got wrong for 32 years, and that I would trade all the rest of it to get back. My son didn't come to me because he was afraid of what I'd do. He heard me be the father who handles things, and he translated that as, "Don't bring him anything he can't handle without it becoming something that can't be taken back." So he carried it himself for 2.5 years. So here is the one thing I'd actually ask you to do this week. It is small, and it will feel slightly awkward. Find the person in your life who thinks of you as the strong one, your son, your daughter, your sibling, your friend, and tell them, out loud and plainly, "Whatever it is, you can bring it to me and I promise you I'll keep my head." Say that second part out loud. That is the part they need to hear. Most people don't stay silent because they think you don't care. They stay silent because they are afraid of what caring will make you do. And the question I carry every day in that kitchen. Who in my life right now is protecting me from myself? And how long have they been at it? If any of this sounded like your house, if you heard the part about the spending account and the phone monitoring and something in you went tight, that is worth paying attention to. The Assaulted Women's Helpline in Ontario is 1-866-863-051, available any hour, and the Coercive Control Support Line through the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. You do not need a plan. You do not need to be ready to leave. You are allowed to call and just ask a question. Comment 1 if you think I made the right call in that restaurant. Document first, react later. Comment 2 if you think I should have said something to her face right then and there, and that any father who sits still while his son is being humiliated has failed him regardless of what comes after. And comment 3 if you think the ministry referral went too far, that protecting Corbin is legitimate, but bringing a licensing authority into someone's livelihood crosses a different kind of line. I go back and forth on 3. I'll be honest about that. I've sat at that table in the dark and gone back and forth on it more than once. Tell me where you come down. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever had to hold still while someone you love was being made smaller. If you've ever had to choose between what felt right in the moment and what would actually help, tell me what you did with it afterward. I'm still working on that part, and I suspect I will be for a while. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, rewritten and reimagined to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.